If you love what we do, then please consider supporting CryptFail on Patreon. Your support helps us grow and to create more content more often. And now, on with the show.
Rin closes the book and she points to Byako-san and puts her hand out, her left hand out flat in front of her, and has her right hand over the top and pulls it up to her forehead. And you think she's asking you if you've learnt sword
to fight.
play.
Chiaki always seems like she is very deliberate about what she says and does not say. But she pauses and seems to pick her words very carefully. And will say, Saito-san, regretfully, my training in combat is lacking.
Rin takes a deep breath in. She places the book on the... Actually, she moves the book off to one side. Looks down at her empty teacup, and Rin does sign something to you, but you didn't quite catch it. Something to do with maybe history or time. She gracefully stands up and bows to the bookkeeper and motions for you to follow.
And yep, and
But
she
she
will
has
also
a
bow.
smile on her face.
Okay.
Yeah, she's not angry.
Good, that's good. She will also bow and follow Rin outside.
Daisuke. His sandals are crunching in the snow as he walks towards the blacksmith. We can see an open area with a forge and, I guess, a basic anvil, and it's probably not lit up or anything.
And it's an elderly gentleman with a long grey beard. And he bows. How may I be of assistance to you, samurai?
Daisuke bows. I have 2 swords I need to... Okay, I have 2 katana here I need to do some restoration on.
He looks at them. I am familiar with them. They are the ones from the village.
Yes, they are. Would I be able to engage your services and your workshop?
Of course. Although I know very little about weapons, my training my whole life has been in farm tools.
That is okay. If you have the tools, I have the training for maintenance on these weapons.
And he closes the door to his house and walks to the side where there's a larger door, and he opens that. And that's more the smith area. You can see the different tools, and it's not a big furnace, but it's a decent size. If you need the furnace, but there's all the other tools. Sanding stone, like for the sharpening, and
I won't need many tools. Perhaps a small brass hammer and punch. Some Nugui-gami as well as a wiping cloth, choji oil, and an uchiko ball with some limestone powder.
He goes around his workshop, and about 5 minutes later he comes back with a collection of things. He said, I do not have the ball. It seems to be only used for certain knives and swords, which I've never done. I do have the powder, and I do have some cloths that might suffice. They wouldn't under normal circumstances, but they might work okay for what you're requiring. You may use my bench if you need to.
Domo, would you have a large cloth I could lay these on to perform the restoration?
And he walks over and takes a cloth and comes over. It's about 3 feet by 2 feet. Sort of a towel size, decent sized towel. That sort of size.
He draws the soldier one and carefully, with the blade facing upwards away from his chest, and holds it up. Quite visibly moves. It is very loose within the handle. The blade's got a little bit of carbonization on it. It's not too bad. It looks like it's been the last time it was used, it was well oiled, but the oil has long since faded. Daisuke knows that in order to keep up maintenance on a sword, you have to oil them regularly. As the corrosion does set in, especially the oxidization on this older steel, depending on the steel that's used. Obviously, higher grade steel would last a lot longer. The lower grade, it's easily able to get oxidized a lot more. So this is more the case with the Ronin sword, but the Ronin sword is still quite tight. So it's more going to just require refinement, cleaning of the oxidization of the sword. So he looks at the handle a little bit more closely, trying to move some of the handle wrap, which is I think it's called the tsukaito. And he manages to locate the makugi, which is basically almost like a little wooden dowel used to hold the handle of the sword, or the tsuka, with the actual blade of the sword. So he examines both sides, seeing one side's a little bit smaller. He starts tapping on that, and tapping a little bit harder as it's not moving, and finally it starts tapping through and eventually pops out the other side. And the wood is fairly old. It looks like it suffered a little bit of water damage at some time. It's probably swollen and rotted a little bit, and then the constant movement has damaged the wood. He looks up at the blacksmith who's watching what he's doing. I require a small piece of wood this size.
And he goes over and sorts through a small collection of different sort of leftover bits he has, and he comes back and he puts them in front of you. Will any of these do?
And Daisuke looks down and picks out a piece that he thinks will be suitable. So he might have to fashion it a little bit. He holds the sword up with the blade facing away from him in his left hand, and it's wobbling in the handle called the tsuka, and he firmly punches down on his wrist as the blade sort of almost stays there for the weight, using the inertia of the hilt punching downwards until eventually the blade almost pops away from the suka, or the handle, and becomes loose. He lays it down and starts to remove the fittings. So he removes the suka off first. And after that is the first seppa, which is like a little, I guess you could say, separator. And then the tsuba, which is the guard, and the habaki, which is the blade collar. So he's really only doing this now to clean the blade thoroughly. So he's checking the base of the blade to make sure that there's no corrosion on there. Using the cloth that's been provided, he wipes the back part of the blade, which goes into the handle, and uses another cloth to wipe limestone just to remove some corrosion from there, and then goes to reassemble the suka. So puts the two seppa back on with the super guard and the habaki blade collar back onto the sword, and slides the suka back on. Fashions a small dowel, which is slightly tapered on one end, and punches that through the hole, which fixes the blade in place, and the blade is now firm. He gets up from the table and turns to the shopkeep. I shall be back momentarily. Daisuke will go to the horse and retrieve the Uchiko ball from Rin's maintenance kit. Daisuke returns to the blacksmith and, using one of the pieces of cloth, wipes down the blade for any residual oil. But after that, he also uses the Nuguigami. It's wiping paper that's actually been made for swords. It's made of soft, sensitive pulp tissue. And it's exclusively made for wiping down the sword, and it wipes off any excessive oil and also unnecessary dust. Daisuke takes the Ichiko ball and dabs it in the lime powder and taps the blade. And after spending several minutes using the limestone powder, the rotten sword cleaned up really well. It had little oxidization on it. Daisuke thought there was a little bit more, but it was more grime that had gotten on it. So grime that had been built up from the oil that was on the blade. It still sort of helped to protect it. Because he's had to completely disassemble them and rebuild them, they won't need maintenance for a fair while. And they're both in, especially the Ronin blade, appears to be in really good condition. So the resale value on these, whoever owned them, could get a little bit more for them if they were to sell them. So because this happened at the same time as when you're in there, with Rin reading.
Yeah.
He would have been probably nearly finishing up just as you both were walking out of the bookkeepers.
Okay.
Daisuke grabs the two katanas and thanks the blacksmith. Asks the blacksmith if there's any compensation that he requires.
You are trying to help our village. That is compensation enough.
And Daisuke thanks the blacksmith. Heads out to take the swords to Amaya and sees Rin and Byako-san. Upon seeing Daisuke, Rin starts walking determined towards him, and Daisuke almost drops the swords. on seeing Rin taking a determined, quite speedy walk towards him. And as she's walking to him, she signs, tells him something, and he stops. He looks a little bit confused and points to himself. Me? And Rin nods and shrugs like, and Daisuke's, but I'm not trained that well. And she signs something back to him. You picked up something like idiot in there.
Okay.
Daisuke signs. Sighs. Daisuke sighs. He's only within a few feet of him now. And he looks over to Byakusan and holds out the 2 katana, and he asks, so it looks like I am to teach you basic sword skills?
My apologies.
I just assumed that you were trained. Is there a preference for sword you would like here? I know that you have a wakizashi, but that is no sword for battle on the field.
I have no preference.
Daisuke looks at both of the katanas and hands you the Ronin sword.
And she will take it rather doubtfully.
Okay. I will take this one. We shall go practice. I think we'll start with sticks first.
I agree. That is probably wise.
Rin, with her hands on her hips, she's looking at the pair of you, nods, and walks off to Amaya. And Daisuke sort of puts his right arm out, asking you to walk, I guess, off to just outside of town.
All right, yep. And she will follow.
He finds some bamboo and uses his katana to cut them down to the size of the katanas. That he's not a samurai yet, though. So,
but he's the most useful one in the party.
Yeah. So you're being trained by someone who you could probably consider as, like, you know, in today's standard, an apprentice.
Well, she will probably explain that all of her training was focused on contacting and communing with spirits and not on combat. But in the same very careful way she has expressed this before. Very careful. Choosing the words very carefully, which she always does, but this topic specifically seems to require caution.
Rin has gone back to the inn and is paying for the room for another night and getting dressed into her ceremonial clothes and meditating in the room. So, I guess over the next couple of days, Daisuke will just be trying to train Chiaki. Chiaki Byakusan.
Mm-hmm.
And Rin will meditate.
2 days where the villagers are probably losing confidence, being like, why are they training and one of them is terrible at it?
Well, they're both pretty terrible.
So the 2 days wear on, and it gets into the afternoon, and it is overcast, and in the distance you can hear a storm approaching.
Hmm.
you've been training pretty hard for the last couple of days with Daisuke.
Mm-hmm.
He's taught you everything he knows about evasion in combat and using it to your advantage, especially in like the battlefield situation. And probably one of the important thing that he stresses is that not to get surrounded.
Mm.
And Rin's dressed in her ceremonial, in the colours of the Crane clan, with a Kakita family emblem on it. And she has a daisho tucked away in a belt on her side. Although probably not when sitting at the table. And Rin signs something to Daisuke, and he turns to Byako-san and asks, Rin wants to know if you are ready.
And she will pause and consider and look like she's about to say something and then changes her mind. And will say, I do not think so, but I will have to be.
Daisuke was just about to have another mouthful of food. And he stops and he looks up. Do not worry. I will have your back. I have never fought ghosts before, but I have seen what the Shadowlands have to offer. I think the Shadowlands are probably a lot worse.
I have spoken with spirits, but I have certainly never fought them. To be fair, I haven't fought any people either.
Ashigaru are trained, but they are barely trained. They are a little more than peasants with spears.
I am very grateful for your training. Thank you.
Daisuke notices Rin starting to sign again, and he turns. He's just about to have another mouthful, and he stops, turns, and she's signing to him. Yes, I did train her as best as I could in the limited time that we had. And she looks a little bit annoyed and does a few short hand signs.
My lack of preparedness is down to the fact I have not been trained before and not any flaws in the training, I assure you.
Saito-san has assured me that if you fall in battle, I will also fall. Not by the hand of the ghost, but by her.
Ah.
He's looking a little bit nervous at the moment. He looks down at his food and he puts the rice back in the bowl and the chopsticks on top. He's done.
I shall do my best not to fall. However, if I do again, it would be no one's fault but mine.
Domo, I appreciate the sentiment. I will have your back. I will make sure you won't fall. He has a side glance at Rin, who's looking at him with almost this curious kind of look.
Saito-san, are you prepared?
She holds up her right hand and sort of does a knocking motion in front of her twice.
That is good to hear.
As the night nears to midnight, which is probably really hard to tell when it's overcast, Rin signs something to Daisuke, and Daisuke turns to Byako-san. If you'll excuse Saito-san, she's going to go prepare. She needs to collect the water, set up in the location of the samurai.
Of course.
And with that, Rin stands up quite gracefully and disappears out of the inn. She'll look around, and the town's really quiet. It's overcast, it's quite dark, except for the light of nearby lanterns, I assume, and the light coming through some of the shutters in a couple of the buildings. Rin draws her katana from the saya, which is the scabbard, and she scoops up some of the blessed water out of the bucket and drips it over one side of the katana and flips the katana in the left hand. Or turns her hand over, rolls over as the water drips down the sword, rolling off the oil that's already on the sword in the cool air, and she drips water over the other side of the sword. She has a determined look on her face as the mist from her breath, the mist coming out at a regular, very slow rate.
How dark is it outside? Like how...
It's reasonably dark. The storm has come in. There is lots of snow.
Okay.
And strangely, there's also thunder.
Strangely.
All right. And as it gets closer to midnight, Chiaki is going to stand up with a sort of, I guess, resigned look. And she will turn to Daisuke and say, How close are you going to stay? You're using a bow, correct?
That is correct.
All right. I am going to head out now. I wouldn't mind a moment alone to prepare mentally.
If that is what you require, Byako-san, I will head out and stand guard in front of Saito-san.
All right, and she will head out into the snow. And basically just sort of, not knowing exactly what's going to happen, stare in the direction of the valley, gripping a katana.
Daisuke has taken up position in front of Rin, about 10 feet away, not directly in front. Daisuke takes up position a few feet in front of, about 10 feet in front of Rin, towards the garden, where...
So a big fog sort of rolls in, and mixed with the snowfall, it's definitely hampers long-distance viewing. And it's very quiet, and it's very cold.
The fog forms a samurai. His armour hangs from broken straps, and his movement is staggered, and he leans on his yari for support. 2 arrows can be seen embedded in his back. He takes a couple more steps before falling to his knees. Where his yari is in the ground, a wooden stake stands, broken about 2 feet up. The remains of his weapon is in the village still. An older samurai moves slowly forward. He is awkwardly dragging his wounded right leg. He is encased in full armour. The helmet, though, is missing, and his face has a cut over an eye, which is roughly bandaged and stained. His katana is in his hand, and his wakizashi is in the belt. Several arrows are in the armour, and as he passes, the broken shaft of one sticks from his leg. He stops as a realization dawns on him that flight is ultimately impossible. He turns and kneels. There is the slightest glance up towards Rin.
As the samurai slightly looks at her, she is visibly shaking, The katana in her hands is wobbling from side to side, and she meets his gaze with determined expression. The mist, her breath is creating mist in front of her eyes. Her lips tremble as a tear rolls down the right side of her cheek. She raises quite deliberately the katana above her head. She slides her rear foot backwards and squares it. She grimaces her mouth and nods confidently.
He slides his katana carefully into the scabbard. He takes his tanto and cuts the straps on the chest piece and gently places it on the ground beside him. He replaces the knife before he withdraws the wakizashi. His hands are trembling and he places the tip against his belly. The fog pushes forward and it creates 6 Ashiri-garu. Their armour is mismatched. The spears they carry are chipped, and one holds a bow in his left hand. They make no sound as they laugh, and they point at the samurai. But this time the smiles fade as their gaze moves to Chiaki. At the back a large brute approaches. The Ashiri-garu part as he strides forward. He hefts the large club he is carrying, and he lets out a soundless yell.
So there's not much Rin can do. She's waiting for the right time. Whether she goes first or not. But she's really... It looks like she's sort of been overcoming with emotion at the moment. She's sort of struggling. The sword above her is sort of wobbling a little bit, but she gains her composure momentarily.
As they begin charging, she's going to sort of hesitate for a moment and then grit her teeth and try and remember all the many things she's learned in 2 days. And what she wants to do is sort of focus on one of the people charging and move backwards as they move forwards and wait for a chance to suddenly strike with the katana.
So, as he charges forward and he lunges at you with his yari, you manage to get your sword into a parry position, and it does actually stop the yari. You don't feel the impact like you did when practicing with Daisuke, but it stops. Like, you're not stopping it, you just stop, like it's in the right position. But there's no jarring impact, but it definitely, as he attacked again, the same thing happened. So when he went from, you parried on the right, you parried on the left, both times, where you were connected with the yari, it reacted as if it had hit something solid.
So she parries a few times, and the first time especially, she looks quite surprised with how this seems to work when fighting a spirit, but sort of accepts that this is what happens when you fight a ghost, and after the second parry, sees an opening and is going to raise her katana and slice at the ghost's shoulder.
There is one charging Chiaki on her right. Just as she finishes her cut and he staggers back from the perceived blow that he received, an arrow flashes past in front of your face. It goes straight through the Ashiri-garu and impacts on the wall behind you. He stops, and there is a fog arrow now in his chest. And he falls to his knees and topples to the side. Big guy looks like he screams, although you hear no sound. And he charges up and swings at Daisuke, who has his bow knocked from his hands, and then he rolls, drawing his katana as the club smashes the ground where he was a moment ago. A big cloud of snow bursts into the air from where it impacted. The two peasants charge forward, and one of them gets hit with an arrow. One of the Ashiriguru snaps off. The archer fires an arrow at him, and it hits him in the shoulder. And he has the same thing. You see a smoke or a fog arrow sticking into him. He swings and crashes into the archer, and they both go down. The second peasant, who was the older of the two, he shrieks as his force strife is more than he has.
Ooh.
So he loses it, and he just goes berserk. He just charges forward. He's swinging no skill. He's just swinging it around his head. And the two Ashiriguru that were in front of him, they sort of stop. They're a little bit uncertain for a moment. And then he just spins around in a complete circle, not holding the bow staff in like the middle, but at the end, swinging it more like a baseball bat. Smashes the first one, who then falls over. He again spins around in a circle, and the one on the ground is trying to get the Yari up to protect himself, and he smashes him again. He doesn't get it in position, and he's just screaming, and he smashes him again, and he doesn't move, and he turns around, and the other one drops his Yari, and he just raises the bow over his head. It's trailing on the ground behind him, and he screams again and runs at the Ashiriguru, who falls over and starts shuffling as fast as he can on his butt away from him. Then he rolls onto his stomach, then jumps up and starts running away, and the peasant chases him off into the night. And the last Ashiriguru charges up with all your having to maneuver out of the way. From the other guys, you were unable to avoid his strike, and he slashes your leg, and you see no visible wound. There is no cut, but you feel your heart miss a beat. Yeah, there's no cut. Your hakama there's no cut, there's no blood, but there's a cold numbness where it hit, and as it hit, you definitely felt your heart stop for a couple of seconds.
Definitely caused her to falter for a moment.
The general plunges the blade into his stomach and does the first cut.
The earrings she's wearing, the jade earrings, are glowing.
So they're providing light?
Not providing light, but they are definitely not glowing as to provide light, but they are glowing a deep green color.
Well, if Rin is looking, when Chiaki looks back, she will see that Chiaki's eyes are reflecting the light. Alright, well, having noticed some glowing earrings, she will quickly turn back, and as the point of a quick glance backwards was to see how far there is between where she's standing now and where Rin is. How much room is there to keep backing up, or should she stop where she is now?
There's probably a good 10 feet.
So she'll continue backing up a little bit. So when she swings at the Ashigaru this time, she's expecting it. So it's not a surprise and she doesn't stumble this time, but she is slightly surprised in seeing him crumple to the ground this time, as without really being able to see the wounds, she hadn't had an idea of how badly off he was. And honestly, it's just a bit of a relief when she's able to drop one. So she will, I guess, then turn, and I'll say my opportunity is that after striking him, she is also able to turn and be in a position to block the other.
He waits for the big, muscly Ashiriguru to raise the Tetsubo over his head again, And then as he starts to swing down on him, he darts forward. His blade passes through the leg, and the Ishiriguru spins around. His Tetsubo hits the ground again, causing another cloud of snow. And he's definitely holding his leg in pain, and he looks very uncomfortable. And Daisuke finishes his lunge and then spins around. Okay, so he darts forward, and he's using mostly the point, jabs at Chiaki's face, but she's able to move ahead and it passes by on the left, and then he slashes down and she's been obviously paying attention and she's moving back, and the slash misses, and then he lunges forward again and she parries it to the side and he does not hit.
Yay. That's good.
The other peasant is off in the wilderness. The
Shrieking.
other Ishiguru is shrieking. The general does the second cut.
And Rin will brace and slice. So she slices down, hits thin air. She was almost expecting resistance, but kind of expected not to have resistance. So she brings the katana down, slicing through the back of the neck, expecting no resistance, and she draws a blade as the fog quite literally dissipates in front of her.
And the Ishiriguru is quite aggressive in his attack on Chiaki, and you've been backing up as he's been lunging and slicing and jabbing. And just when you're starting to think his ability is going to outstretch yours, he does a big lunge, and just before the blade hits, he turns to fog. It just washes over you.
Before even her katana reaches beside her, steps forward towards the bucket, pulls out a ladle of water and rinses both the left and the right side of her katana as her opportunity. The two opportunities.
Mm.
The clouds part a bit, and moonlight shines into both the valley and the courtyard. And for you, it's quite bright. It's not like sunlight, but it does feel it's bright enough that you're having to shield your eyes a little bit.
Yeah.
Actually, especially you.
Yes.
As the clouds part, the Rin's earrings slowly get duller and duller till eventually they don't glow anymore. They're just plain jade earrings. He pulls out a cloth and wipes the blade and draws it out front of her, resting the spine on the back of her hand, slides it smoothly into the saya, which is the scabbard. She looks up at Chiaki and signs, "Are you okay?"
Oh, I was facing away from her, so
Oh,
I
okay.
would not see that.
All right. Well, she will wait.
Okay. If you're now looking at her, when she does turn around, Rin will see her eyes reflecting the light, but then she will sort of blink and they will stop doing that.
Reflecting light.
Yes.
Interesting. Rin's a little bit confused. And then she signs, "Are you okay?"
I believe so. There does not appear to be a wound.
Daisuke has the same symptoms, not to the same extent though, but he explained when he got hit that he feels very tightness of his chest. He doesn't know that it was his heart that stopped for a couple of seconds when he got hit, but he felt a great pressure and pain,
Hmm.
and he's feeling a bit hard to breathe at the moment.
Yep.
But there's no mark, there's no impact, there's no wound from Tetsubo. He feels it would have broken ribs if it had hit him.
And the pain was never in the area that got hit? Like, my leg
Numb.
never hurt?
Yours
It
was a little
just,
numb.
okay,
Where it got hit was
Okay.
numb, but the pain was in
Okay.
your chest.
Okay.
And that numbness has slowly started to ease.
Okay.
So yeah, he's wavering on his feet. He's not too steady. He's like, it's a little bit blurry. I can't breathe. My chest, it hurts. And again, there's no wound. You saw where he got hit. The fog is gone. The arrow is no longer there, and there's no wound or puncture in the.
Yeah, basically, she's going to probably enlist the help of somebody to get him
Yeah, a couple
inside.
You know, they've started as the moonlight came out. You know, there's been a couple of peasants have carefully slid their doors open and peered outside. So a couple of the more braver ones have run over and are helping you.
Okay, she's going to get them to help bring him somewhere inside out of the snow so it's warm, get him lying down, and basically just tell them, I haven't seen anything exactly like this before, but I think he will recover with rest. It wouldn't hurt to give him some warm sake or maybe even willow bark tea if you have any. Try and keep him calm if you can.
And they're like, thank you. And the innkeeper's like, I think I have some willow bark.
Good.
He goes out the back to check. And the door to the inn opens and the other peasant has returned. He looks exhausted.
Oh,
He's holding his bow staff, still by the end, but it's dragging along behind him. He's just standing there. He looks pale. Couple come over and lead him off to the side, and they're patting him on the back and telling him how brave he is, and he's not really responding. And they're like, get him sake! Like, that's the fix of everything.
Hey, can't hurt, right? Probably.
Rin's sort of a bit reserved. Daisuke, not so much.
They were sitting merely in our warehouse. We had no use for them. None of our townsfolk have any training in it. If they are more use to you, then please accept them as payment for your aid here.
We thank you for your kind generosity. And Daisuke, I guess Byakuya-san still got her katana. Yep. Daisuke slides it into his belt.
And she will thank them for the katana she's not good at using.
The Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game is available from Edge Studios, starring RavenInsane as Rin, Emily as Chiaki, and Ghost as the Storyteller. Sounds and music were provided by Sirenscape and Nash Music Library. This has been a Crit Fail production. Thank you very much for listening.